UK lawmakers have once again thrown the Brexit process into chaos. They gathered in London today for a rare Saturday session. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was trying to do what his predecessor failed 3 times to achieve: get parliamentary support for his Brexit deal. But in a 322 to 306 decision, lawmakers rejected Johnson's deal. They said he must work with the European Union to negotiate an extension beyond the October 31st deadline. Here's what Johnson had to say earlier.
I will not negotiate a delay with the EU, and neither does the law compel me to do so. I will tell our friends and colleagues in the EU exactly what I have told everyone in the last 88 days that I've served as Prime Minister, that further delay would be bad for this country, bad for our European Union, and bad for democracy. So next week, the government will introduce the legislation needed for us to leave the EU with our new deal on October the 31st.
Wow. For more, let's bring in Markos Kounalakis. He's a foreign affairs columnist for McClatchy and a fellow at the Hoover Institute. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to start with the basics here, Markos. What happens with the Brexit process in the next few weeks now?
Well, Jamie, the Brexit process really isn't a process. It really is a political game at this point. So it's hard to really say what will happen. As you noted in the run-up piece, now Boris Johnson, by an act of Parliament, must, by midnight tonight, request an extension from the European Union. He says there's no way he's going to do that. He is saying Halloween is the deadline, effectively saying he is not going to listen to what Parliament has actually dictated to him. So he is going to stand in defiance. The expectation is he's going to stand in defiance of what Parliament's wishes are, and really try to either apply his deal, which he negotiated just recently, or crash out, but most likely try to push his deal by Halloween.
Wow. Well, so how big of a setback is this then for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, especially if he's just saying, well, forget what Parliament says and we're just doing what I want to do?
Right. On the one hand, he's saying stuff it, right? And on the other hand, he really has to recognize the political realities of what's going on, not just in the halls of Parliament, but also in the streets. I mean, there were, some would say, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. The numbers are sort of undetermined, right? But some are saying up to 1 million people today in the streets. So this is something that is really an emotional event in the United Kingdom. It's one that's a political event. And of course, when he lost today's vote and approached it with such seriousness, you know, he really was not the sort of buffoonish Boris Johnson we've seen. He was someone who was looking very serious today on the floor of Parliament, looking for a historic event. But as he noted, he's 88 days into essentially a failed prime ministership where he can't get anything through Parliament. So what happens? Maybe Parliament decides on a no confidence in government and he and the entire country goes into elections. But likely the gamesmanship is not done. We've got a few more hours, of course, before the deadline to ask for an extension. And Parliament has said they're going to reconvene on Tuesday.
Well, do you think that's why he's so adamant about not asking for an extension with the European Union at this point?
Yeah, he has based his entire political well-being and career and future on the ability to do what he has really said, which is get out of the European Union by Halloween. October 31st is the deadline. He said it's going to happen over his, regardless of what happens. Almost, it's something about being dead in a ditch. And so over his dead body is this extension going to occur, which means he's basically created a binary decision for parliamentary moves. There are manipulations that can be attempted. The Speaker of Parliament is suggesting he will send the letter asking for an extension, maybe giving Boris a little more life. But essentially, he's taking this to the mat at this point, and he is staking his political future on it. And he was hoping that Parliament would feel the gravity of today and pass his deal so that he could then move on and have a real prime ministership with and start trying to heal the wounds of this nation because the political divide is just growing greater. People are resentful, the intransigence, not quite yet violence, but certainly the violence of emotion that is being felt throughout the United Kingdom and in the other areas in the region, of course, Europe itself, are just growing.
Well, you see those crowd sizes there, and that was pretty remarkable to see that many people showing up. What changes does Parliament want Johnson to make to his Brexit plan?
Well, that's really undetermined, right? The plan is a very simple plan. It's essentially just guaranteeing that in some way the Northern Ireland question gets managed, not solved, not comes to any sort of real conclusion, but rather gets managed by a sort of sleight of hand between something that's, legal versus practical. And but the Parliament is insisting on much more. And you have to recognize that the majority of Parliament are likely those who would be called Remainers. They are ones who don't want to leave the European Union. So there's also an inherent conflict between what those who are within the legislative body and what Boris Johnson is promising. There's a huge divide between the two.
What is the EU's current stance on this Brexit deal? And if Johnson was to ask for an extension, do we know how the EU may even respond to that?
Jamie, let me answer the second part of that first, because yes, they've indicated that if a request comes in, the European Union has indicated that they will grant the extension. Now, whether it's a long extension or a short extension is unclear, but the indication is that they could get probably an extension to January 1st. The first part of that question is, how does the EU look at all this? Well, they are just as tired of it as everyone else within the UK, maybe more so, because what's happened is it's just created so much uncertainty for the business community. It's created a tension between European Union members. It's allowed for populisms to try and rise within domestic political sphere. And then you've got a leader in France, Macron, who is really trying to reshape the European community and bring it into a much stronger, unified body so that it can deal with all the other threats that exist in this globalized world. Threats from Russia, threats to the global economy, threats that exist within member states because of, as I say, populism or other types of political movements towards the far right. There's lots of problems. This is the last thing they want to deal with.
Markos Kounalakis, thank you so much for joining us.